Hi there, my name is Philip Ideson. I want to welcome you to the Art of Procurement podcast, the podcast that helps you, a forward-thinking procurement professional, position yourself and your team to proactively take advantage of the revolution that's taking place in procurement today. By interviewing industry trailblazers and sharing insights from our own experiences, my team and I pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that procurement teams are using to elevate their impact. In today's podcast, I'm going to share with you another conversation from our recent AOP Digital Outcomes 2022 virtual event. Facilitated by Kelly Barner, the topic was called Can Digital Help Scale Category Management? It was with two of my favorite Art of Procurement guests you will hear from in a moment. So with that said, let's go into the session and I'll hand over to Kelly.
So good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Kelly Barner, the head of content and brand partnerships here at Art of Procurement, and I'm joined by two guests for what promises to be a very interesting conversation relating to our daily theme of scale. I have with me Gary Levitan, who is the head of global procurement at WeWork, and I have Professor Remko Van Hoek, full professor of practice at the Sam M. Walton College of Business at the University of Arkansas. So we've been chatting, but officially welcome Gary and Remko to the session.
Thanks so much for having us. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So Remko, I'm actually going to start with you. Before entering academia, you held a number of positions within the business. Can you tell me what that range of perspectives has given you an opportunity to observe specifically around category management?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, even though I'm back in academia, that's for me a way to help multiple companies as opposed to just the one I happen to work for. And so I love category management. I think that that's where so much of the fun in procurement roles resides. That's where you have the opportunity to lead with intelligence, to surprise your stakeholders with data, to generate, to think through in your cross-functional team what might be new and interesting ways to get the best out of the market against our needs. And you're never done with it. You know, I always say you're never done with strategic sourcing. Don't take me wrong. I love supplier relationship management, and we need to do more of it. We need to get better of it. That applies for almost all of us. But you'll never be done with strategic sourcing. Like one of the things we did when I was at Disney is we actually made it part of our business planning cycle. So we had our category teams do just a quick update to their managers and ultimately to me as the CPO on what's changing in your category going into the coming budget period that we need to be preparing for. Do we need to return to the market? Do we, and so you're never done with it. And it's where so much of the fun in our day-to-day resides.
Yeah. Now, Gary, Remko talked about teams. And I know from the conversation that you and I had for the Sourcing Hero podcast that team and talent and collaboration are huge for you in terms of how you run your organization. Where does maybe that team element and the bigger picture perspective that we need to have in order to execute category management, where do those two things maybe connect?
So I absolutely agree with that. I think there are a few aspects that are important to really figure out when you're building out an organization and how team and category management relate. I think you have to understand the needs of the business first and foremost, and that means project delivery, value generation, profitability. What's your profitability model? And then you really have to organize a team that supports that, right? Category management, depending on the business, can take on a lot of different philosophies. Like you could have a team of category experts that are very specific industry experts, so to speak. If the business is geared towards that and requires that, if your stakeholders need that. Or you could have a team of generalists where, if you, depending on the type of company or the type of product that you're delivering, that are really responding to ad hoc business needs. So I think that's really the key in linking your team to the value delivery in the company. I also think it's really important, as Remko mentioned, category management is, also in my opinion, the most fun aspect of what we do. But it's only one part. And that could also be broken out into a few different forms of work, some more rote than others, some more strategic than others. And I think it's important to create a team where there's ability to learn different aspects and just do different things. Human beings don't love doing the same thing over and over and over again, generally. And to create that kind of dynamicism in between different types of functions within a category strategy organization, I think is also really key in building those teams out.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that we heard about a little bit from Jack Freeman first thing this morning is, of course, you can't avoid data in any of this, right? Even when we're talking about people, we're talking about strategy, we're still looking at the role that data plays in that. Gary, what role would you say data plays in helping inform you, both in terms of how to build out and construct or divide up your team, and also in terms of how that team needs to connect with business outcomes?
I love this question. I love it because I try to look at it a little bit differently than I think a lot of my peers do.
Good.
At least based on the industry research I've done, the conversations I've had. And really what I mean by that is typically, obviously not always, but typically through the years, staffing a procurement or a category management organization has to do with metrics around spend under management, right? There are industry benchmarks depending on what your business line is for how many full-time employees, let's say, you need, depending on different tiers of spend under management. And then to guide, the level of expertise that you need is really based on either your product delivery metrics or how esoteric each category is. What I've found is that spend under management doesn't have a one-for-one relationship to actual workload. Just actual human being work hours. I always like to use this anecdote. I managed a multi-billion-dollar category as a team of one, which sounds great, and I used to brag about it, but we're talking about 2 or 3 really large transactions a year. And I could have hired a team based on those, benchmark industry metrics, but I was able to handle it myself. So really what I'm trying to do is use data, and at WeWork, we have so much data on transactions, on pipeline, on sales potential, on growth, and just really use as much data as possible to try to, number one, estimate how much actual work there is within each category. And that will also, number two, will create levers in the future if you're looking at pipeline and predictions of when certain levers could be pulled so that you can anticipate growth and anticipate headcount before it gets too late and then you're scrambling to get your head above water. So I think data is really important to try to really estimate what that capacity requirement is.
Yeah, we still have to interpret the data, figure out what it needs to mean operationally. Remko, let me pull you in with a similar question. What's your perspective on how data should inform the way procurement works and builds teams?
Yeah, thank you. And I think Gary makes a really good point. And just to build upon that, whereas benchmarking can be very helpful because there's so much that's transferable from one procurement organization to the other. We need to be careful that some of the metrics we use don't end up shooting ourselves in the foot, because sticking with the example of spend under management, you can have a ton of spend under management, but do a really crappy job at it.
Yes.
So you can be top tier in the benchmark and really drive zero business value, maybe even negative business value. So we need to be careful that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot. The other thing with spend under management is, typically procurement teams are a lot smaller than they wish they were. And that metric is risky for that reason also. But the point about data in general is, if you think of technology can do so much for us, but there's no excuse from having good data. Like in the work that we've done on blockchain, I often say if you use blockchain to drive visibility, you need to make sure that you clean up your data and you keep it clean, because otherwise you're using blockchain to get better visibility into your poor data, right?
Right.
And by the way, if you have data, if you then kind of don't do anything other than get visibility, then you don't use it to fix a process, then you have better visibility into your broken processes, right? So it's like there's no excuse from data, but if you get it right, data is such an important tool for us for stakeholder engagement, because it can make your team so, it sets them up for leading with insight from the very get-go. Did you know that your peer, that also buys from that same agency that you work with? And by the way, did you know that they have completely different terms for something very similar, right? If I have that data, minute number one that I'm meeting with the stakeholder to talk about the category, I'm leading with insight, and I'm being helpful, and I'm setting up for a meaningful discussion that can go towards strategy. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. Now, before I ask my next question, I have to give an audience warning. I'm about to say something very shocking. So if you're having sort of a weak, uncertain Thursday, just cover your ears for the next 10 seconds. Some people think procurement is boring. And Remko, you have made the statement that digital can chase the boring out of procurement. So what did you mean when you made that statement, and how do you envision that working?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's based upon the work that we've done in research on blockchain, and it's based on the work that we've done. You've met with Jacob on robotic process automation. I've learned a lot from him too. We actually just together published a paper that goes into his experience and lessons learned. And what I meant with that is try to automate the parts where you'd like to spend the least amount of time. So, try to use the robot to do the data entry on the pricing tables. Try to, robotic process automation sounds really sexy, but it's best used in the boring stuff. And that is super, super empowering to our teams, because it means they spend less time on the spreadsheet and more time in the discussion with stakeholders, more time on strategy, and more time developing relationships. So you want to use automation to take the boring out of procurement, so that your teams can focus on developing strategies and driving relationships. That's what I meant with that.
Now, a quick follow-up to that. One of my big takeaways from yesterday was from Johan Ronning from McKinsey, and he made the statement right up front that procurement needs to make a choice between being all in, truly being strategic and on the ball and visionary, or they need to outsource. I wonder, would you say that this possibility of automating the boring stuff, is that part of procurement being all in and managing things efficiently at scale? Or does it create sort of a middle ground between this idea of being all in and outsourcing?
Yeah, I think, it's thinking this through in real time. For me, it's about, creating, if we're back to procurement teams are typically smaller than they wish to were. This is a way to enable and empower and equip the procurement team to be much more insightful and much more focused on driving business value and coming up with new business solutions and new strategies. That probably falls in the all-in category more than anything else, to be honest with you. Note that a lot of examples when it comes to the technology part can involve a degree of outsourcing, and can definitely involve buying technology and getting some help, getting it, implementing it, running it, maybe even maintaining it. But most applications that I've seen, are it's more of a support rather than the technology is outsourced, I'm done with it. It augments my work, and it empowers and enables and equips my teams, and it frees up bandwidth to go towards other things.
Yeah, no, I do think that's a valid point, right? It's sort of like we've been talking about, what does spend under management really mean, right? Management can mean so many different things. Procurement can be all in, big picture, but that doesn't mean we have to be 100% hands-on on everything that we are tasked with. Gary, You're not escaping this. Is procurement boring?
Absolutely not. It's the most exciting part of my day. There are aspects of every task that are boring, even the things we do for hobbies, right? I mean, I play guitar, and learning scales and music theory, I can assure you, is extremely boring. But I completely agree with everything that Remko said about digitalizing the rote, repetitious stuff. So I'm going to answer it in a bridge way to that, because quite frankly, most procurement organizations are not only undersized, but they don't have the funding necessarily to have the pick of the litter for either outsourcing processes or systems or third-party tools. So there has to be a way to get to that. And there is an approach to that. It's not quite digitalization, but there is still ways of really let me take a step back. What digitalization does to make it less boring is it makes the repeatable stuff repeated and takes it off your plate. You could still do that without a platform, without software, without outsourcing. You could do that by templating. You could do that with creating like an end-to-end process for certain things that just everybody follows. I actually have a pretty end-to-end, somewhat rudimentary, but non-digital end-to-end category management process where it's just a toolbox of category management tools, which are slides, where anybody can start creating a strategy just by picking slides and answering the questions or inside the slide. And by virtue of that, you start learning about a category, about suppliers, about spend. So really what I'm saying is the bridge to digitalizing all these things, you can still do. And when you're ready, when you have the funding to be able to actually offload that, you'll already have that framework ready. And it's scaling, right? It's replicating and scaling repeatable processes. And as far as the second question, I'll just go ahead and comment on that as well.
Yeah.
I think it's very much a part of going all in. Yeah. You can't, with all due respect to McKinsey, nobody's been able to really successfully outsource strategy, right?
And thank goodness, right?
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
They try, but it's awfully difficult for a company that is married to their business model to outsource that business model to a third party. It's just where's the diminishing returns? It gets to a point where you're spending so much time and money trying to educate and bring your consultant to the starting line. You might as well just do it in-house at that point. So offloading the tactical rote support pieces but keeping the strategy, to me, that's going all in. If it gives you more bandwidth to be more strategic and to really zero in on the value that you can provide, that's going all in.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because procurement may not realize it, but it's sort of the typical entrepreneurial journey. It's never just about scaling. Anybody can scale. You can do more. It's about scaling quality. It's about scaling and preserving experience. And Gary, it sounds like you were talking about that sort of slide-based process that people could walk through to achieve category management. It's ensuring that quality stays fixed. So starting with you, Gary, how do we leverage digital to really ensure that whether it's specific to category management or whether it's something else that procurement is doing, how can we leverage digital to scale and protect quality at the same time?
You kind of started answering that question. Scaling, you're right. Scaling the volume is easy. Yeah. But that doesn't ensure quality or profitability, more importantly, in what we do. The only way to ensure that is it's got to be the same thing. You've got to figure out what you're the best in and then repeat that, and then keep finding additional activities or deliveries or processes that you're really great in, and then repeating those and kind of either improving or removing the ones that you're not good at, quite frankly. And as long as humans are doing that, you're not going to be able to replicate. There's a limit, right? There's a tipping point where when the volume goes up, there's diminishing returns. And that's what digital could really take away, is that it allows you to like really hone in on that perfect process or that perfect presentation or that perfect analyses and just replicate it. And then when you tweak it, it's seamless across your entire organization. And just that really simple ability, that cold calculating logic of a machine, so to speak, is able to do that. And that sounds boring, replication, but that's truly the only way to scale properly.
Well, and it's certainly not boring for anybody who's actually tried to do it, right? I mean, even the work that's required to present the exact same consistent experience to consumers or users, there's so much going on behind the scenes to handle all the variability that exists in real life. Remko, what are your thoughts on, making sure that as we scale, quality of experience, quality of output, quality of outcomes, our topic for this week, are not lost?
Yeah, so I really like where the conversation is going, and just building on Gary's point of we can't always afford technology. The good news is, like for example, we've learned about blockchain that it's actually not expensive to start. It's not a difficult technology either. You actually don't need to do proof of concept anymore because it's already proven it works. And it only takes a few interested parties and a few excited stakeholders to get started. And by the way, that does not have to be an end-to-end complete procurement process or an end-to-end supply chain. You can do it in a fraction, a part, So I love the example that we published about Walmart International in Canada, who does it for settlement of freight with their transportation providers. That's just, that's a very laser targeted use case. And they started with just a few. And so actually it's not expensive. It's not hard to get started. It doesn't take long to get it up and running as well. And then you can scale. Then you can say, okay, it's working with 3. Let's invite the next 10 in based upon the track record that we can see. If you look at the robotic journey that Jakob has been on, he started with 1 or 2 processes, and he picked them intentionally because they had, really excited stakeholders that wanted to do it. So let's begin there. Yeah. Over time, they scaled and ended up with over 100 processes. But, so I think that's part of how you address the scalability issue. The point about quality specifically, it goes right back to how are you using the technology to have better visibility into your poor data, to see more of your broken processes, or are you using it to build better processes to, impact across relationships rather than see more on your own? And that's really where the fun is. And that's, by the way, not typically the role of the machine. It's typically the role of the human. That's typically where your teams take what the technology can do and put it to really good use with their stakeholders to implement better processes and drive new value in relationships.
Now, as we start to wrap our time, at Art of Procurement, we always try to bring things back to taking action. And we're certainly focused on outcomes this week. So starting with you, Remko, and then Gary, I'll give you an opportunity. What is a piece of advice that you would offer up to watchers, listeners, audience members, sort of in the context of this conversation we've had today around a concrete thing that they can take action on around digital, around category management, around quality? What would your piece of advice be, Remko?
I would think through how exciting the future of work in procurement is going to be, enabled by technology, and think through that lens. How can it make the future of work better, more impactful, more strategic, more relationship centric. Number one. And secondly, don't, chase the shiny new thing when it comes to technology. Focus on, is this a solution looking for a problem, or what supply chain problem am I going to be able to fix if I use this technology? Those would probably be my two nuggets.
Yeah. What about you, Gary? What's your advice?
So I would say embrace data, and not necessarily data is a tricky thing sometimes for procurement.
Yes.
What we consider savings, our CFOs consider cost avoidance, or sometimes nothing. But I urge people to learn the data language of our stakeholders and peers and bosses, and then find that data language that speaks to them, that highlights your organization and the value that you're bringing. And if you happen to find opportunities to increase that value, or maybe you find opportunities maybe to improve, use that data to guide you, and then show that through data. Because to Remko's point, there's no hiding from it. It's if it's arithmetic, it's arithmetic. And really the other piece is, figure out what you and your organization is really great at, replicate it, and then figure out the next best thing, and then replicate that, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Well, and I like that at the base of all of this advice is the idea that despite all the digital and despite all the opportunities of automation, procurement is still a thinking person's game, right? There's so much strategy work. There's so many tough choices that have to be made. Gary and Remko, I can't thank you guys enough. This was a fascinating session. I officially decree you both not boring. Thank you as well to everybody who listened in. If you are staying with us for the next session of Art of Procurement Digital Outcomes, you can head back out to sessions. You'll be joining Meeta Gupta from Globality and Elizabeth Schlad-Lawrence from Bayer for a conversation around self-guided buying that Philip Eidson is facilitating. So thank you for joining me for this session. Gary and Remko, thank you so much for your time and expertise. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their day.
If this episode struck a chord with you, please do send it to somebody. We grow here at Art of Procurement through word of mouth, and that would be really appreciated. You can also support us by giving us a thumbs up, a star rating, or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Since 2015, we've built the world's largest free resource for procurement professionals looking to elevate their impact. Our resources span podcasts like this, videos, blog posts, papers, and events. To join us on the inside and to ensure you never miss an episode, a webinar, event, or a post, please do subscribe to our weekly newsletter, This Week in Procurement. You can do that at artofprocurement.com/subscribe. That's artofprocurement.com/subscribe. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.